In the frigid winter night of a small upstate New York town, icy rain lashed against the window panes. A weak yellow light spilled from the windows of a modest ranch house at the end of a quiet cul-de-sac. Mary, her eyes swollen and red, quietly eased open her bedroom door. A soft knock echoed, followed by her father-in-law's low, gravelly voice from the hallway. "Let me in for a minute, Mary. Just want to talk." "Mary?" The door slowly creaked open, and from that moment, the line between right and wrong began to blur within the young woman's tormented heart. The crushing loneliness after her loss and the suffocating vulnerability were ruthlessly exploited. Outside, the rain continued its icy descent, mirroring the coldness of what had just transpired within the room. A horrifying secret, buried in tears and guilt, began to take root that night. Later that afternoon in the quiet cul-de-sac, the usual sounds of passing cars, kids playing, and the aroma of dinner wafting from the neighboring houses filled the air. Inside the ranch house nestled at the end of the street, Mary, 24, busied herself chopping vegetables at the old gas stove. The rhythmic thud of the knife against the cutting board mingled with her soft humming of an old folk song her mother used to sing. Mary wore a faded t-shirt, her long dark hair pulled back in a ponytail, her bright eyes shadowed with fatigue after a long day at the small alterations shop near the bustling town square. The house was barely 300 square feet, but for Mary, it was her whole world. The wedding photos hanging on the wall, though yellowed with time, were still a cherished treasure. In the pictures, Mary and her husband, Kevin, 27, smiled radiantly, hand in hand amidst a golden wheat field in a peaceful rural part of the state. They had been married for a year, and although life was still challenging and lacking in many ways, their love was like a small flame that burned steadily, warming their humble home. Kevin came in, his work shirt damp with sweat after his shift at the construction site near the highway overpass on the outskirts of town. He placed a plastic bag containing a few apples on the counter, offering a gentle smile. "Bought you some sweet apples, honey. Got a little extra pay today, maybe we can take a walk down by the river after dinner." Mary looked up, her eyes sparkling with joy. "Really, honey? It's been so long. But let me finish making dinner, Mom and Dad will be home soon." Mary's mother-in-law, Barbara, 58, and father-in-law, George, 60, were simple, down-to-earth people with hearts full of love. Barbara stayed home, managing the household, while George drove for a ride-sharing service to make ends meet. Although their family wasn't wealthy, they had always treated Mary like their own daughter. Barbara often shared stories of their past struggles, how they had scrimped and saved to raise Kevin. "You and Kevin just live well together, and good things will come," she would often say, stroking Mary's hair as if it were her own daughter's. That evening, the family gathered around a simple meal of meatloaf, mashed potatoes, and green beans. Laughter filled the small dining area as Kevin recounted a story about a co-worker who had slipped on a banana peel at the construction site. Mary placed a piece of meatloaf on Kevin's plate, gently scolding, "What a silly story. Eat before it gets cold." George sat across from them, his kind eyes watching his two children. He was a man of few words, but every time he looked at Mary and Kevin, he felt his life had come full circle. But that simple happiness didn't last. One rainy morning, while Mary was arranging fabric at the shop, her phone rang. A stranger's voice, trembling, came through the line. "Is this Mary? Your husband, Kevin, he was in an accident at a busy intersection on the highway. You need to get to St. Luke's Hospital right away." Mary stood frozen, her hand shaking so violently that she dropped the spool of thread onto the floor. She rushed out into the street, not even grabbing a raincoat, just running frantically through the icy downpour. St. Luke's Hospital was crowded. Mary found her way to the emergency room, her heart pounding as if it would burst. George and Barbara were already there, their faces ashen. The doctor emerged, his voice somber. "We did everything we could, but he lost too much blood." "Prepare yourselves," the doctor said softly. Mary collapsed, her choked sobs mingling with the sound of the rain. Barbara embraced her, tears streaming down her own face. George stood there, his hands clenched, his eyes red, unable to utter a word. Kevin's funeral took place in a silent grief. The quiet cul-de-sac was filled with the scent of incense. Neighbors came to offer their condolences, everyone mourning the kind, hardworking young man. Mary, dressed in black, sat beside the casket, her eyes empty. She held Kevin's picture, whispering, "Honey, why did you leave me all alone like this?" In the days that followed, the small house became eerily silent. Laughter had vanished, replaced only by Barbara's sighs and George's distant gaze. Mary couldn't return to the alterations shop. She took a leave of absence, spending her days at home, cleaning, cooking, and taking care of her in-laws. But every time she entered the bedroom, looking at the bed where she and Kevin had slept, her heart would ache. Barbara, seeing her pain, felt deep sympathy. She would pull Mary to sit with her on the porch, sharing stories to comfort her. "You're still young, Mary, don't let this grief hold you back forever." But Mary would only shake her head, silent tears falling. George became even more withdrawn after Kevin's death. He still drove for the ride-sharing service, but every time he came home, he would sit alone on the porch, looking up at the sky as if searching for something. Mary noticed he often held an old photo of Kevin, gently stroking it as if afraid it would disappear. Once, Mary brought him some water, asking softly, "Dad, are you okay?" "Don't worry about me, Mary," George said, his voice low. "It's just, I miss Kevin so much." His words were like a knife to Mary's heart, but she could only nod, embracing him like a father. As the months passed, Mary tried to live for her in-laws. She told herself that since Kevin was gone, she had to take care of them in his place. But deep down, she felt an emptiness that couldn't be filled. The quiet cul-de-sac still echoed with the sounds of life, but for Mary, everything felt distant. Little did she know that greater storms were brewing, starting with the whispers of neighbors and the invisible pressure from the very family she loved. Early one morning, the local farmers' market buzzed with the sounds of vendors unloading their goods and the chatter of shoppers. Mary carried her basket, her steps slow on the familiar path. A long-sleeved shirt concealed her sunburnt skin. She kept her head down, trying to avoid the curious gazes of the fish and vegetable vendors. Since Kevin's death, she rarely went out. But every time she did, she felt those scrutinizing looks, the hushed whispers. "That Mary, huh? Heard she's staying with her in-laws, won't even think about moving on." A meat vendor whispered to the person next to her. Mary's heart felt heavy. She clenched her hand, walking faster. Back home, Mary prepared lunch, green bean casserole, fried chicken, and some pickled cucumbers. Barbara sat at the table, her hands clasped together, her eyes sad. Her health had declined significantly since Kevin passed away. Mary placed a bowl of casserole in front of her, saying softly, "Eat up, Mom. I made it light for you." Barbara nodded, but her gaze at Mary was searching. "Mary, have you thought about your future?" she asked, her voice hesitant. Mary froze. Before she could answer, George walked in from the porch, holding a water bottle, his eyes stern. The meal passed in heavy silence. After cleaning up, Mary sat on the porch, watching the neighborhood kids play hopscotch. She remembered the days when Kevin was alive, how he would tease her that they would have a child named Chubby because Mary loved fried food. Thinking of that, tears welled up in her eyes. Barbara came out, sat beside Mary, and took her hand. "Mary, I know you're hurting, but your father and I are getting old. I just want our family to have some hope left," she said, her voice trembling. Mary looked at her, her heart tightening. "What hope, Mom?" she asked. Even though she had a vague idea, Barbara sighed, her gaze distant. "Kevin was our only son. If there are no grandchildren, our family line will end. I'm not pressuring you, but I hope you'll consider having a child to carry on our name." Her words were like a 1,000-pound weight on Mary's shoulders. She wanted to protest, to say she couldn't, but looking at Barbara's pleading, tearful eyes, she could only lower her head in silence. In the days that followed, Barbara's words haunted Mary's mind like a ghost. She began to notice the scrutinizing glances of the neighbors. Once, she overheard Mrs. Davis, the elderly woman who sold lemonade at the end of the street, saying to someone, "That Mary just stays on at her in-laws' place." Probably waiting for the inheritance or something. Another woman scoffed. What inheritance? That family's dirt poor. Old George is probably just keeping the daughter-in-law around to carry on the family name. Those words were like sharp knives stabbing Mary's heart. She ran home, locked the door, and curled up in her room, tears streaming down her face. Barbara noticed Mary's change. One evening, she called Mary into her room, placing a hand on her shoulder. Mary, I'm sorry if I made you sad, but I only want what's best for you, for our whole family. If you don't want to, I won't mention it again, she said, her eyes red. Mary hugged her, choked with emotion. I don't blame you, Mom. I just don't know what to do. Barbara patted her back, whispering, You're the only one I trust, honey. I just hope you'll think about your father too. George had become even more withdrawn since Kevin's death. He rarely spoke to Mary, but every time he looked at her, his eyes were filled with worry. Once, Mary brought him tea and saw him sitting, looking at an old family photo taken during Christmas. Dad, please don't be sad anymore. I'll try my best, Mary said, her voice trembling. George looked at her, his eyes complex. Mary, I don't want to pressure you, but I'm afraid our family will have nothing left. His words made Mary feel an invisible pressure, as if she were carrying the entire family's honor on her shoulders. The neighbors started gossiping more. One afternoon, Mary overheard some women in the cul-de-sac whispering. A daughter-in-law staying with her father-in-law and not moving on? There's definitely something going on. Another added, poor young Mary, probably being forced to stay and have a baby. Who knows how strict old George is? Mary stood behind the wall, each word like a cut. She wanted to shout, to explain, but she knew the more she said, the more they would talk. The pressure from her family and public opinion pushed Mary into a corner. She began to lose sleep. Every night, she lay staring at the ceiling, thinking about Kevin, about Barbara's words, and about George's gaze. She wondered what she should do to not disappoint her mother-in-law, to not let her father-in-law down, but how much could she sacrifice? Those questions had no answers, only making her heart heavier. Barbara's health continued to decline. One morning, Mary took her to the local clinic. The doctor said Barbara had heart failure and needed rest and to avoid stress. Mary took care of Barbara diligently, from cooking bland meals and reminding her to take her medication to sitting and talking with her to keep her spirits up. But every time Mary looked at Barbara, she saw that pleading look, reminding her of the responsibility to carry on the family line. It made her both love Barbara and feel suffocated. One day, Barbara called Mary into her room, clutching her hand tightly. Mary, I don't have much longer. I just hope to see our family have a grandchild before I close my eyes, she said, her voice weak. Mary lowered her head, tears streaming down her face. Mom, I don't know what to do, she choked out. Barbara stroked her hair, whispering, You're the only one I trust, honey. I just hope you'll think about your father too.
Her words were like sackless binding Mary's soul. Not long after, Barbara passed away on a rainy night, the small house once again plunged into mourning. Mary wore black, standing beside the casket, feeling as if her whole world was collapsing. Neighbors came to offer condolences, but the whispers never stopped. Barbara's gone now, just Mary and George left. I wonder what they'd do. One person said, another added, Mary's so young, staying with her father-in-law like that. Something's definitely going on. Mary heard it, her heart aching, but she no longer had the strength to protest. After the funeral, the house felt emptier than ever. George barely spoke, only quietly walking around the house and then sitting alone on the porch. Mary tried her best to take care of George in Barbara's place, but every time she looked at him, she saw a heavy gaze, as if he were waiting for something. Once, Mary brought him dinner, asking softly, Dad, do you need anything? Are you feeling okay? George looked at her, his voice low. Mary, I don't need anything, just for our family to continue. His words made Mary tremble, as if she were being pushed into a dead end. The neighbors' gossip grew louder. One afternoon, Mary heard Mrs. Henderson, who ran the corner store, telling a customer, "Mary used stays on in that house. George probably won't let her live. Who knows what goes on between a young woman and an older man living in the same house?" Mary stood behind the counter, her hands clenched, wanting to scream that they were wrong, that she only wanted to fulfill her responsibilities, but she knew the more she explained, the more they would talk. The pressure from public opinion pushed Mary into despair. She began to question herself, was she doing the right thing? Should she continue to stay here or should she leave? Those questions haunted her every night. She remembered Barbara's words, George's gas, and the neighbors' whispers. She felt trapped between filial piety and her own conscience. One evening, Mary sat on the porch, watching the drizzle fall, hugging herself, tears streaming down her face. "Kevin, if you were here, what would you say to me?" she whispered, but only the sound of the rain answered. Little did she know that the days ahead would be even more difficult, with a painful decision awaiting her. After Barbara's death, Mary felt like she was walking a tightrope, one wrong step away from falling into the abyss. She took care of George diligently, from cooking and laundry to reminding him to take his blood pressure medication. But every time she looked at him, she saw not reproach, but the profound grief of a father who had lost his only son. It made Mary feel like she had to do something, even if it was just to soothe his pain. One afternoon, Mary went to the market to buy some fresh fish to cook. On her way back, she overheard some women in the cul-de-sac whispering. "Mary's staying with her father-in-law probably because she feels sorry for old George. But who knows what goes on between a man and a woman?" Mary stopped, her heart tightening. She wanted to turn around and confront them, but she knew their words were like the wind, the more you chased them, the more tangled things became. That evening, Mary cooked a nice dinner, fish stew, pumpkin soup, and boiled greens. George ate a little, his gaze distant. After dinner, I carried Mary out to the porch, where I often sat looking at the night sky. "Mary, I know you've sacrificed a lot for this family," he said, his voice low. "I don't want to pressure you, but I used to pay our family will have some up left." Mary lowered her head, her hands clasped tightly together. "Dad, I understand, but I don't know what to do," she said, her voice trembling. In the days that followed, George's words were like a thorn in Mary's side. She began to wonder if she didn't do anything, could survive this grief. She remembered Barbara's words, the responsibilities she had entrusted to her, but her heart told her that she couldn't sacrifice her whole life for something that felt wrong. One rainy night, George came home, his clothes soaked. Mary quickly got him a towel and cooked him a bowl of hot soup. He sat at the table, his eyes tired. "Mary, I'm sorry. I don't want you to suffer," he said, his voice choked. Mary looked at him, her heart in turmoil. "Dad, what do I do if everything is against me, but I still love this family?" she asked, tears streaming down her face. That night, in the midst of confusion and extreme pressure, Mary felt like she had no choice left. She wanted to do something to soothe George's pain, to preserve the family's honor. But she didn't realize that a moment of weakness, a collision of two souls adrift in loss and loneliness, would lead her to a decision she would never forget. It wasn't a love, it wasn't a desire, just the desperation and confusion of two lost people in the darkness. Rain poured down the quiet cul-de-sac, water flowing in streams over the uneven pavement. In the modest ranch house at the end of the street, Mary sat huddled in an old plastic chair, her eyes blankly staring out at the continue. Flooded jar. The rain drummed steadily on the tin roof, threatening to drown out all other sounds, but it couldn't silence the whispers in her mind. What have I done? How cold I have gone so wrong? Mary placed a hand on her stomach, where a small life was growing, a secret she didn't dare confront. It had been 3 months since that fateful night, but Mary remembered the heavy rain as if it were yesterday. George had come home, his face weary. His eyes were filled with a deep sorrow whenever he spoke of Kevin. She had only wanted to comfort him, to do something to ease their shared pain. But in a moment of weakness, a mistake had occurred not out of romantic love, but out of the overwhelming pressure and confusion of two people lost in grief. Mary had never wanted it to happen. And she knew George hadn't either, but the consequence was real, growing inside her. Mary stood up, walked into the kitchen, trying to distract herself with chores. She took out a pot to cook rice porridge, chopped onions and ginger. But each slice of the knife felt like a cut to her own heart. George sat on the porch, his gaze distant, not saying a word. From that day on, he became even more withdrawn, only going to work and coming home, avoiding direct eye contact with Mary. She understood she was also tormented, enduring an unspeakable pain. In the morning, Mary went for a checkup at a clinic near the market. The doctor, a middle-aged woman, looked at her with sympathetic eyes. The baby is healthy. About 12 weeks. Eat well and try to stay relaxed, okay? Mary nodded, but inside she wanted to scream, how can I relax? On her way home, she passed the market, hearing the vendors' whispers. That Mary, eh? Hers is pregnant, and nobody knows who the father is. A fish vendor said, her voice full of insinuation. Mary lowered her head and walked faster, her heart aching. The neighbors' gossip intensified. One afternoon, Mary was hanging laundry in the yard when she heard Mrs. Henderson from the corner store talking to Mrs. Davis. Mary's pregnant, and George is just staying quiet. Their family must be in a real mess. Mrs. Davis coughed, daughter-in-law and father-in-law? Who would have thought? But it's a sham. Poor young Mary, carrying that kind of sham. Mary stood behind the wall, her hands trembling, the shirt in her hand falling to the ground. She wanted to run out and scream that they were wrong, that things weren't as they thought, but she knew her words would be like a fleeting breeze. Mary went back inside, closed the door, and sat on the bed. She had her wedding photo with Kevin, tears streaming down her face. Honey, what do I do? I didn't want this, I didn't. She whispered, but only the sound of the rain answered. She thought about the baby inside her, an innocent life, but also the source of all her pain. She wondered if she should keep the baby or leave, start over. But every time she thought about leaving George, leaving this house, she felt like she was betraying her promise to Barbara, to Kevin. George wasn't doing any better. One evening, Mary brought him tea and saw him holding an old photo of Kevin. Dad, drink your tea, it's cold, she said softly. George looked at her, his eyes filled with guilt. Mary, I'm sorry. I don't deserve to be your father, he said, his voice choked. Mary shook her head, tears falling. Dad, don't say that. I don't blame you. I just don't know how to go on. The two sat there in silence, with only the rain as their companion. In the days that followed, Mary tried to live as normally as possible. She went to the market, cooked meals, took care of George, but every step felt heavy. She began to realize that the baby inside her wasn't just a secret, but a responsibility. She couldn't abandon it, but she also couldn't face the eyes of the neighbors, George, and her own reflection. One night, she stood in front of the mirror, looking at her growing belly, and whispered, "Baby, I'm sorry. I don't know how to protect you." The pressure from public opinion grew stronger. 11. Mary heard Mrs. Davis telling a customer, "Mary's pregnant and still living with George. Is probably forcing her to keep the baby to carry on the family name." Mary stood behind the counter, her hands clenched, wanting to scream that they didn't understand, but she just quietly turned away, tears streaming down her face. She knew no matter how she explained, they wouldn't believe her. Mary started thinking about leaving. She didn't want her child to grow up amidst gossip, didn't want George to suffer any more pain. But every time she looked at him, she saw not coercion, but the pain of a father who had lost everything. She wondered how George would live if she left. How long could she endure if she stayed? Those questions had no answers, only plunging her deeper into despair. One rainy night, Mary sat by the window, cradling her belly. She remembered Barbara's words, "You are our only hope, mine and your father's." She thought about Kevin, about their happy days. She whispered, "Kevin, if you were here, what would you say to me? Would you forgive me?" Little did she know that a truth was about to be revealed that would change everything. Mary was 8 months pregnant, she could no longer hide it, and the gossip in the quiet cul-de-sac grew sharper. Mary's about to give birth, and George is still quiet. Their family must have some unspoken issues, Mrs. Davis said, her voice full of curiosity. Mary heard it, but she no longer had the strength to protest. She just wanted to give birth to her baby, to find a new path for both of them. Mary began preparing for the delivery, going to the local clinic for checkups, buying a few necessary items. But every time she walked through the market, she felt everyone's eyes judging her. 11. Mrs. Henderson called her over and asked directly, "Mary, tell me the truth. Was the father of that baby?" The whole Tom's talking. "If you don't explain, people will think all sorts of things." Mary looked at her, tears streaming down her face. "Mrs. Henderson, you don't understand. Please, please don't say any more." She turned and walked away, her steps heavy. George also noticed Mary's change. He started talking to her more, but every time he mentioned the baby, he would fall silent. One evening, Mary brought him tea and said softly, "Dad, I'm about to give birth. There is something I want to tell you." George looked at her, his eyes filled with worry.
"What is it, Mary?" he asked. Mary took a deep breath, intending to tell him everything, but then she stopped. She was afraid that if the truth came out, they wouldn't be able to face each other anymore. One day, Mary decided to clean out her and Kevin's room. She opened the closet, taking out old mementos, Kevin's favorite shirt, their wedding photo, and a small wooden box she had never opened before. Curious, she opened the box, and her heart skipped a beat. Inside was a carefully folded letter with Kevin's familiar handwriting. Mary's hands trembled as she unfolded the letter and read each line. "My dearest Mary, if you're reading this, I might not be here anymore. I don't know what will happen, but I want you to know that I will always love you, always trust you. Whatever you do, I forgive you. I only want you to be happy. Don't let grief hold you back. Take care of Mom and Dad, but don't forget to take care of yourself. Yours always, Kevin." Mary hugged the letter and sobbed uncontrollably. She hadn't known that Kevin had written these words before the accident. She felt a sense of release, as if Kevin was somewhere telling her that she didn't need to torment herself anymore. She sat there, holding the letter, whispering, "Thank you, Kevin. I'll try, for you, for our baby." Mary decided to tell George the truth. She didn't want to continue living in secret, didn't want her child to grow up amidst gossip. One evening, she knocked on George's door, Kevin's letter in her hand. "Dad, there's something I need to tell you," she said, her voice trembling. George looked at her, his eyes filled with worry. Mary took a deep breath and recounted everything about that rainy night, the confusion, the baby. She cried, saying that she didn't blame him, that she only wanted both of them to be free from this burden. He just sat there silently, tears streaming down his face. "Mary, I'm so sorry. I was wrong. I made you suffer," he said, his voice choked. Mary shook her head, taking his hand. "Dad, I don't blame you. I just want us to be honest with each other, for the baby, for this family." The two sat there in silence, but this time the silence was no longer heavy. It was like a mutual understanding, a new beginning for two weary souls. Mary gave birth on a beautiful sunny day. The baby was a healthy, chubby girl with big, round eyes just like Kevin's. Mary named her Hope, hoping she would have a peaceful life, free from the suffering her mother had endured. Holding Hope in her arms, Mary felt her heart begin to heal. She looked at her daughter and whispered, "I'll protect you, I'll give you a good life." George came to the hospital and looked at his granddaughter with kind eyes. "Mary, you've done something I didn't dare to dream of," he said, his voice trembling. Mary smiled and took his hand. "Dad, I want Hope to grow up in love. I don't want her to carry the burden of the past." George nodded, tears streaming down his face. He knew he had been wrong, but he also knew Mary had given him a chance to make amends. After being discharged from the hospital, Mary decided to leave the house in the quiet cul-de-sac. She didn't want Hope to grow up amidst the neighbors' gossip. She rented a small apartment in another part of town, starting over. George supported her decision, even though he knew he would be lonely. "You live for yourself, for Hope, Mary. I'll be okay," he said, his eyes full of love. Mary found a job at a local alterations shop. She worked hard, pouring all her love into Hope. Every night, she would hold her daughter and tell her stories about Kevin, about their happy days. She didn't hide the past from Hope, but she taught her that the most important things were love and forgiveness. The neighbors in her new town didn't know Mary's story. They only saw a strong young mother, always smiling despite the challenges of life. Mary started taking evening classes, learning professional tailoring skills, hoping to one day open her own small shop. She wanted Hope to grow up proud of her mother. A year later, Mary went back to visit George. He was still living in the old house, but he was more open now. He tended his garden, cared for his potted plants, and often told the neighbors stories about Hope. "My granddaughter looks just like Kevin, with such bright eyes," he would say, his voice full of pride. Mary looked at him and smiled. "Dad, thank you for letting me find my own way." Mary was no longer afraid of the gossip. She knew her and Hope's life was the clearest answer. One evening, she stood by the window, watching Hope sleep soundly in her crib. She whispered, "Kevin, I did it. I found happiness. For you, for our daughter." She felt a sense of peace, as if all the pain had faded away. Mary's story spread in her new neighborhood, not through whispers, but through the way she lived, strong, loving, and never giving up. She became an inspiration to other women, those who were also finding their way through difficult times. Mary knew her life wasn't perfect, but it was whole, because she had learned to forgive others and herself. Life sometimes pushes us into painful crossroads, where pressure from family, society, and ourselves can feel suffocating. But like Mary in the quiet cul-de-sac, every woman carries within her the strength to overcome. Despite mistakes and wounds, we can rise, forgive, and find our own light again. Years passed, marked by Hope's milestones, her first steps, her first words, her first day of school. Mary watched her daughter grow with a fierce protectiveness and an unwavering love. She built a life for them, brick by brick, fueled by her determination and the memory of Kevin's gentle spirit. Her little alterations shop flourished, a testament to her hard work and skill. George became a constant in Hope's life, a doting grandfather who filled her childhood with stories of her father and the simple joys of their small town. He would often visit Mary and Hope, his presence a quiet reassurance that the past, though painful, had also forged an unbreakable bond. The whispers of the past faded into the background noise of life, no longer holding the power to wound. Mary had found her peace, not in forgetting, but in understanding and moving forward. One sunny afternoon, as Hope played in the park, a young boy approached her, his eyes curious. "Your grandpa tells funny stories," he said. Hope giggled. "He does. He knew my daddy." Mary watched from a distance, a gentle smile gracing her lips. The cycle of life continued, carrying with it both sorrow and the promise of new beginnings. As Hope grew older, Mary shared her story with her, not as a tale of shame, but as a testament to love, loss, and the strength of the human spirit. She taught Hope the importance of honesty, forgiveness, and the courage to face adversity. Hope listened, her young heart understanding the complexities of her family's history with a wisdom beyond her years. One evening, as they sat on their porch, watching the sunset paint the sky in hues of orange and pink, Hope turned to Mary. "Mom," she said softly, "do you ever think about, what if things had been different?" Mary looked at her daughter, her eyes filled with love. "Honey," she said, "life doesn't always follow the path we expect. But every twist and turn brings us to where we are meant to be. And right here, right now, I wouldn't change a thing." Hope leaned against her mother, a comfortable silence settling between them. The past was a part of them, but it didn't define them. They had built a future rooted in love, resilience, and the unwavering bond between a mother and daughter. Years turned into decades. Hope grew into a strong, compassionate young woman, carrying her family's story with grace and understanding. Mary watched her with pride, knowing that the seeds of love and resilience she had sown had blossomed beautifully. George eventually passed away peacefully in his sleep, surrounded by the love of his granddaughter and daughter-in-law. His passing marked the end of an era, but his memory lived on in the stories they shared and the love that bound their family together. Mary, now a grandmother herself, often sat on her porch, watching her grandchildren play. The quiet cul-de-sac had changed over the years, but the lessons she had learned in that small ranch house remained etched in her heart. Life was a tapestry woven with threads of joy and sorrow, love and loss, strength and vulnerability. And in the end, it was the connections we forged and the love we shared that truly mattered. Her story, once a whispered secret, had become a quiet testament to the enduring power of the human spirit to heal, forgive, and find light even in the darkest of times. As the years softened the edges of memory, Mary found a quiet contentment in her life. Her alterations shop remained a cornerstone of her days, a place where she not only practiced her craft but also built connections with the community. Customers, drawn to her skill and her warm demeanor, became friends. They shared stories of their lives, their joys and their struggles, and Mary, in turn, offered a listening ear and a comforting presence. Hope, now a young professional, often returned to visit, bringing with her the vibrant energy of a new generation. Their conversations were filled with laughter, shared dreams, and the comfortable understanding that comes with a deep and abiding love. Mary had watched her daughter navigate the complexities of the world with the same strength and compassion that had guided her own journey. One crisp autumn afternoon, as Hope helped Mary tend her small garden, she paused, a thoughtful expression on her face. "Mom," she said, "have you ever thought about dating again?" Mary chuckled softly, her hand stilling as she pruned a rose bush. "Oh, honey. That was a long time ago. My life is full, with you and the shop and my friends." Hope smiled gently. "I know, Mom. But you deserve happiness in every way. There are good people out there." Mary considered her daughter's words, a flicker of something unfamiliar stirring within her. It wasn't a longing for the past, but perhaps a quiet acknowledgement that life continued to offer possibilities, even in its later chapters. A few months later, a new face began appearing at Mary's shop. A kind, unassuming man named Arthur, who owned the local hardware store, needed some alterations done to his work clothes. He was a widower, a gentle soul with a quiet humor that Mary found herself enjoying. Their initial interactions, focused on measurements and stitch lengths, gradually evolved into friendly conversations about their lives, their shared experiences of loss, and their hopes for the future. Arthur's presence brought a new warmth into Mary's days. He would often linger after his fittings, sharing a cup of coffee and a story about his grandchildren or a funny incident at the hardware store. Mary found herself looking forward to his visits, a quiet anticipation blossoming in her heart. Hope, sensing this gentle shift, was overjoyed. She encouraged Mary to spend time with Arthur, recognizing the genuine connection between them. Their relationship unfolded slowly and naturally, built on a foundation of mutual respect and understanding. It wasn't the passionate whirlwind of young love, but a comfortable companionship that brought a sense of peace and belonging to both their lives. One spring evening, Arthur invited Mary to a small town concert in the park. As they sat side by side, listening to the music under the starry sky, he took her hand, his touch warm and reassuring. Mary smiled, a deep sense of contentment settling within her. Life had indeed offered her another chance at happiness, in a way she had never expected. Their relationship blossomed, bringing new joys and shared experiences. They took walks in the park, visited local farmers' markets, and spent quiet evenings on Mary's porch, watching the fireflies dance, much like she had with Kevin so many years ago. But this time, there was a different kind of peace, a gentle understanding that came with age and shared history. Eventually, Arthur proposed, his words simple and heartfelt. Mary, looking into his kind eyes, said yes, her heart filled with a quiet gratitude for this unexpected chapter in her life. Their wedding was a small, intimate gathering, a celebration of two people finding love and companionship later in life. Hope stood by her mother's side, her heart filled with joy. Mary's life had come full circle. She had navigated loss and hardship with strength and resilience, raised a wonderful daughter, and now found herself embarking on a new journey of love and companionship. The whispers of the past had long faded, replaced by the gentle murmur of a life lived with courage, love, and an unwavering belief in the possibility of happiness, no matter the detours along the way. Her story was a testament to the enduring human capacity for healing and the unexpected gifts that life can offer, even after the darkest storms.